Hey all, welcome. Hope you had a nice weekend. Today I kind of want to, even though Nietzsche, I don't know if he ever really comes into sharp focus, but I want to sort of see if I can bring Nietzsche to some kind of denouement. The denouement is a resting place. And just so you have a general, even if he's not crystal clear yet, just so you have a general lay of the land, what I'm going to ask you to be accountable for in the second essay, okay? So last time we referred to the two quotes on page 57. In paragraph 2, he characterizes master morality, right? Now, these are not understood as the philosophy of slaves or the philosophy of masters. These are two different mindsets. Slave mentality is one that depends and elects to depend on systems to let the systems do their thinking for them, hence slave. Master morality is one who recognizes the importance of systems but is not necessarily bound by them. Okay? And so, paragraph 2 on master morality, I'm not going to read that aloud, but notice what he's doing there. He's showing a sort of revelry in power, right? Reveling in the glories of power. And it's not always pretty, right? The human desire for power is not pretty, right? But it is us. And so he's arguing that we must live more fully in our humanity and not deny our Dionysian in order to reap the rewards of order and peace and stability given us by what he sees as our excessive dependence upon the Apollonian. Okay. So then in the third paragraph on page 57, I do want to go through this more carefully. He talks there about slave morality. Okay. Now, I'm going to set this up right because I'm going to be talking about Jews and Nazis today. I got to be careful, right? This is the individual Nietzsche claims to be, and is, heralding. I herald the arrival of the Übermensch, a new kind of human being who does not need to systematize, who realizes that systems have their place but is not bound by them. And one does this in part by relying less on logic and relying somewhat on music. That's going to sound weird. We'll come back to that a few times here, what the role of music is. Right? And so, couching this in history somewhat, in relatively recent history, right? Early 20th century. The Nazis and Jews there are something that we're going to evoke. But also more distant history, right? I'll just put it this way. So this is the individual that, or the type of individual that Nietzsche thinks humanity needs in order to remain human and not become Apollonian to the point of the complete exclusion of the Dionysian, in which case we are just robots, right? But and Uber, right, doesn't mean super. It was mistranslated into English as Superman, right? And that's how we got the comic books, right? And then the awful DC movies. No, they're all right. Right? This is Overman. And of course, we can have Uber Damen, but he wouldn't have said that because he's a douche, and I'm not. Right? Übermensch means overcoming. Übergehen means to go over, to survive. Untergehen means to go under, right? And so there's a lot of talk in Nietzsche, and Hitler for that matter, about Übergehen and Untergehen. But the number one Übermensch that Nietzsche, right, because he does talk about people like Napoleon, right? And the person who Nietzsche identifies from history as the greatest Übermensch of all, want to have a guess, was Jesus Christ. Because, right, I mean, the meek shall inherit the earth. That's a pretty big flip, right, from how things had been for all of human history. For all of human history, the truth of it was, the strong do what they will, and the weak endure what they must, right? But why? Because you know Jesus wasn't a Christian, right? Please tell me you know that. Yeah, that's anachronistic, right? The Buddha wasn't a Buddhist either. The Buddha was a Hindu who came up with a new way of doing what he saw Hinduism as trying to do. So the Jews had been talking for quite some time about a Messiah, and they had been enslaved by the Assyrians. And then when they finally, when the Assyrian Empire sort of, did its thing, crumbled, right, receded, the Jewish people had about 30 years of self-rule, which they thought was amazing. And then, oops, the Romans came along. Clunk, nope, your freedom's gone again, you're slaves again, sorry. Was the socio-political background for all this Jewish talk of a Messiah, right? And so Jesus was, if you will, came up in a community that had been downtrodden by external forces for centuries. So with that historical context in mind, let's listen to this paragraph about slave morality. Okay? Nietzsche says, "It is otherwise with the second type of morality, slave morality. Supposing that the abused, the oppressed, the suffering, the unemancipated, the weary, and those uncertain of themselves should moralize. What will be the common element in their moral estimates? Probably a pessimistic suspicion with regard to the entire situation of, right, the powerful and the not so powerful, and the unpowerful at all, right? Perhaps a condemnation of human being life together with the situation is what they would moralize, right? That things are going badly because people like them are suffering. The slave has an unfavorable eye for the virtues of the powerful, has a skepticism and distrust, a refinement of distrust of everything good that is there honored." He puts good in quotation marks, which makes me wonder, but he seems to be saying, right, it's not good in their minds, but it is objectively strong and stands the test of time and its different power structures, right? On the other hand, those qualities which serve to alleviate the existence of sufferers are the ones that are celebrated, right? He says, are brought into prominence and flooded with light. It is here that things like sympathy, the kind helping hand, the warm heart, patience, diligence, humility, and friendliness attain to honor. Those are the virtues that are highlighted, right? For here, these are the most useful qualities among the suffering, right? And almost the only means of supporting the burden of existence. And then with one fell swoop, he says, slave morality is essentially the morality of utility. So who's he capping on there? J.S. Mill, right? Right? So in that sense, that's him, in his own style, railing against systematicity. Okay? But he's not saying systematization has no place, just that it cannot be basic in the way that Mill and Kant treat it. And maybe that's unfair to Mill and Kant. You could accuse him of that. You just need to argue it. Right? A deeper purpose, that is, may be served by having some system or other, or a few lying around, right? But the deeper purpose must be understood first. Okay? What is that deeper purpose? Will to power. Okay? We've talked about will, right? The reason that's there is because of the metaphysical corner Schopenhauer and, by result, Nietzsche were painted into, but they're okay with being, well, Schopenhauer's not okay with being painted in there. Nietzsche's fine. He's like, I got enough here still, right? And the power part is not brute force, but the ability to be free of, to act independently of some system or other, to be like the improvisational musician who doesn't need to follow sheet music in order to sound good. So when we started out, the first thing I said about Nietzsche is he said that philosophy is not about the search for truth, but rather for what improves life. This is what improves life, according to Nietzsche. Okay. So it's an open question with some evidence, one way or the other, how deep this anti-systematization goes in Nietzsche. Okay? Right? Anti-systematization entails, possibly, questioning even the fundamentals of philosophy and testing them for their fittingness to the human condition. Right? I did observe in a prior lecture that Nietzsche was seldom seen anywhere without a copy of Emerson's collected works under his crook of his arm, right? Maybe under the crook arm. Right? And one of Emerson's most repeated aphorisms, right? Aphorism, both Nietzsche and Emerson engage in aphoristic reasoning, which is not the kind of linear presentation we see in Mill and Kant, but rather a set of observations that the reader can arrange in their own way in contraposition to one another. Okay? But so what Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote is, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." Well, that sounds quite rude. I don't like to pick on little people, little things, little anything, right? Sometimes little is the source of the best things we experience, right? So by little here, I'm translating that to mean systematic, right? So a foolish consistency, right? Thinking that you can never ever contradict yourself. Well, maybe human nature is itself self-contradictory, right? But if we can, right, be anti-systematic, maybe the anti-systematicity goes all the way down, and even this is something, right? That's the law of non-contradiction. It's the basis of logic. Maybe it even goes to the elimination of that, right? And maybe that's too far, and maybe that's a critique of Nietzsche. Okay. But so. Nietzsche is fairly infamous, right, for saying derogatory things about Jewish people, right, who he identifies as the slaves, because they literally were, who tamed our inner Dionysus, right? Know this, though, he was an equal opportunity hater. He had even worse things to say about the Germans. And of course, you can have German Jews, yes, but he was treating this in a sort of painting with a wide brush style approach, right? So Nietzsche both hated and respected the Jews most of all, and for the same reason. That there was another mind above all human minds, right? Abraham was a Jew, right? So the monotheistic religions all come from within the tribe originally, right? Right? It's the most will to power one can affirm, right? The meek shall inherit the earth. Those who are actually in power will find themselves falling in the full light of truth, right? And so taking power from the powerful is exactly what makes Jesus Nietzsche's Übermensch. Okay. So Germans, by contrast, were incredibly obedient people. And because of these reasons, Nietzsche despised that about his countryfolk, right? And I mean, was he right about that, them being too obedient? I mean, 6 million Jews later, 6 million Jews, Romanis, LGBTQ, etc., right? Yeah, it became a problem, right? Look what happened under Nazi Germany, right? But the opposite, this is where I'm going to try to kind of pull it together, right? The opposite of mere obedience for Nietzsche is music. That's kind of where it comes in. The fact of music, how it got there and how it represents our furthest expression of emotion, right? He's saying that we must be musicians and the instruments are our own minds, okay? So there's this idea that our free will, or anyway, our capacity for reason, is slave to our emotions. And therefore, it's kind of troubling to see how we have free will. Nietzsche, and I think I'm with him on this, say nonsense to that, right? Then it is this furthering of emotions and the creating of new emotions, right? New expressions thereof is will to power and is disobedience, or at least, the absence of being obedient, right? I'm not skipping here. I really want to incorporate this music as being free of dependence upon systems, right? As a contrast between, right? Because what he's worried about is that the Apollonian has really gotten us far, right? In terms of a more peaceful society, but we've given up the Dionysian to get there. And if we draw out the, right, if we draw out the line, the timeline on this, and things don't change, eventually we're going to, right, rid ourselves of the Dionysian entirely. This is his concern. That, not that there aren't going to be supermen running around, right? Well, we need them, right? But that we will lose something about our humanity that's really tough to get back again. How are you going to reintroduce the Dionysian once it's been banished from Earth, right? So, this framework of good and evil that human beings operate by, Nietzsche says, is the wrong one. And that his framework of the Apollonian and Dionysian better captures humans in their true nature. And so he makes a musical justification for will to power, right? Right. And remember, power is not brute force, but the casting off of systematicity, or the ability to operate without it, like the improvisational musician, right? Music can better maintain our understanding of what's going on, given the fact that we are in a Heraclitean metaphysic, right, in which all is flux, and reality around us is a maelstrom, if you will. So obedience is an affliction we can trace back to systems that demand obedient minds, right? And so disobedience also is will to power, right? But we said disobedience is not stealing your parents' car and running it off a cliff, right? It's, right, not disobedience against one's forebears, but rather disobedience to the social climate enabled by the obedience of one's fellows to antiquated power systems. Okay. So that's kind of a lot, and again, it's not possible to. I say I'm having a hard time with it. I don't have a hard time with it. I do pause more often, but it is. Relatively speaking, when I'm doing Kant and Mill, I'm kind of on cruise control. You can't do Nietzsche on cruise control. It really is a struggle, ein Kampf, right? to work with the guy and see what he's saying. But in as much as there's a consensus, I've presented it. Okay, that's not even a total consensus. Again, it comes from a more careful reading of Nietzsche, right? People get confused and distracted by his bombast and attribute to him a voice that simply he doesn't have, right? He's not bellowing. He's saying, take a hammer to your idols, not to smash them, right? But to tap them and see whether or not they're hollow, right? What are the real reasons for having these idols? Okay. So, do you have any questions about Nietzsche? It's kind of tough to come up with them. Contemplate what you've taken notes on so far. Go through your notes, go through the reading. Ask me questions as you see need to, right? I still haven't figured out what day I'm going to assign the next paper. I want to have this Wednesday be pretty much you guys, right? Between now and Wednesday, please look at your notes from Mill, Kant, and Nietzsche. And I want to have a session where you basically just fill in the blanks, any gaps that you have in your notes, or if you see two things in your notes and they seem to contradict each other, right? That's the root of a question for me. How do I reconcile these two things you said about philosopher X, right? And then, of course, out of that conversation, once we're all clear on what three of them are saying, we'll start talking about how on earth to adjudicate among them, right? And choose one of them as the analyst, right? As the person whose work you're going to use to analyze the causes and effects of the Great Recession. See it kind of coming together? Okay. So I hope that going back on your notes and sort of reading them over will give you will clarify your picture of Nietzsche. But of course, I can only say sort of so far how I put what he's written together and how my colleagues who study Nietzsche do. And I would at this point kind of need to know, all right, now that I've explained things in a general way, what kind of specific things do y'all, each of you, require? And it's going to be different things. Sometimes it's going to be the same. To round out your picture of the dude. Okay. So in that spirit, I'll hang out now if you want to talk any of this stuff if you need to, but I certainly can't start the next philosopher yet, because we've now, right, with the three philosophers, the lectures, the readings on the three philosophers, and whenever you decide to finish Inside Job, right, everything's already been presented. Okay, now it's just the conversation will be around comparing the three of them and how to apply them to this ethical dilemma. So with that, we can adjourn, and I'll stick around if you have any. No, I sat on it a second ago, scared the crap out of me. We can adjourn, and I thank you for showing up today. Have a good time, and we'll see you Wednesday. Thanks, you guys. Have a good night. Thank you, my friend. You have a good day now. Cheers.